Hey guys, in this video I'm going to talk to you about my current Fuji X lens lineup. After 2 years of shooting Fuji almost exclusively for both professional as well as personal work, and also having reviewed most of their lenses, I feel like I finally settled on a lineup of lenses that works best for me. This video has been long in the making, probably long overdue. I do own these lenses. I purchased them with my hard-earned dollar bills. Though people accuse me of only renting and reviewing lenses, while yes, I do actually rent or borrow lenses to see if I like them, and yes, I will usually tell you what I think about that rented or borrowed gear, it's actually because I genuinely am searching for the best gear that works best for my situation, so I don't feel bad about doing that at all. But in this video, everything you see here is mine, purchased by me, not given, rented, borrowed, stolen, materialized from thin air, or otherwise it's mine. And it's actually just now that I feel like it's complete. There are only one or two other lenses that I would really love to have, but I don't do the type of photography enough that would warrant owning them, so I won't buy them. All these lenses here get used and have an important place in my kit. I've owned other lenses, but if I didn't use them enough, I have sold them off. Now, of course, I don't take all of these lenses with me to every photo shoot. That would be ridiculous. I try to only carry 1, 2, or 3 at a time. So what I want to do is talk to you through each of the shooting situations I find myself in and which of these lenses I'll bring along to each one. So here are some timestamps to help you navigate to those sections which might be most interesting to you based on the type of photography you do. You can also find these timestamps in the description. In intimate situations like birthday parties or just sitting in the living room, just enjoying being together, I'm usually going to be shooting with the 16mm 1.4 as it gives me a very interesting perspective that I feel like lends itself well to children and pets. It's a playful field of view and it also lets me get a lot of environmental context. If you have more than one kid and or pets, it can also be great for allowing you to capture a whole group without too much effort. The only drawback is that your kids might get sick of you sticking a camera in their face because you have to get close with this lens if you want to fill the frame with your subject. Which is why I love the 35mm f2. This is my favorite shoot-around lens. And not just because the focal length is a nice medium focal length which gives just enough reach but also just enough wide enough angle for some context, but also because it's just so small, light, and inconspicuous. Lastly, we have the 50-140 2.8, sometimes with the 2x converter also. It probably goes without saying, but I love using this guy to capture ball games, recitals, anything where you're off in the distance, but you really want to have that memory. This is the guy that I use. Now, most people are going to say what you want is a good 35mm equivalent focal length for street photography or reportage or documentary photography. And for a while, I certainly subscribed to this view, shooting with the 23mm 1.4 for most of my street photography. Of course, the f2 version of this is going to work out great as well, or the X100 series if that's what you want. But for me, myself, I've just gotten tired of that focal length. That's why I choose, yes, you guessed it, the 16mm 1.4 as my go-to street photography lens. Again, with this field of view, it's just so interesting and so wide that it's actually much easier to capture interesting characters without attracting their attention because you can appear to shoot past them and still have them in the frame. It's also nice for shooting wide because it's easier to zone focus with unless you happen to be very, very close to your subject, which, by the way, is the one drawback of shooting with this lens. You have to get close, sometimes uncomfortably close, if you want to fill the frame with your subject. Which is why sometimes it's nice to take a break from that focal length and the stress that it brings and get a bit more reach and flexibility in your street photography. And for that, I bring out the 18-55 kit lens. Partly this is because I like switching back and forth between video and photos, and this lens is perfect for street style video. But the more I've used it for shooting hybrid, the more I've decided that I like it, and I'm not ashamed to admit using a flexible zoom over a prime. Now, I wouldn't recommend this to beginners, and the reason is, as I've stated before, it's because I really feel like if you're new to photography, you should start with a prime lens or two and get good at composition and the constraints that they provide. You won't appreciate this until you try it, but having the constraint of a specific focal length will teach you so much. But as it stands for me, if I'm not shooting with my first pick, the 16mm 1.4, I am shooting with this guy. For landscape photography, you really don't need a fast aperture. The priority here is flexibility, high quality rendering power, sharpness, low chromatic aberration, and stuff like that. With that in mind, most people are going to recommend the 16 to 55mm f2.8 on the wide end, coupled with the 50 to 140 on the long end. And that's what I would recommend to you also, unless you're me and you choose to shoot with the 18 to 55 variable aperture lens. So why do I choose this lens over the 16 to 55? Well, several reasons. The 18 to 55 is stabilized, which I actually like because I will do handheld landscape photography on occasion, don't hate me. It's also cheaper than the 16 to 55 and its image quality is stellar. But since I also need this lens for video, it would be mostly redundant to pick up the 16 to 55. And if I really need that 16mm focal length, I can always take, you guessed it, this guy out. It just keeps popping up. Which, as you can see, I actually do quite often. Some of my favorite landscape photos were shot with the 16mm 1.4. There are times as photographers that the point is the experience and the photography takes a backseat. A midday hike, for instance, or a trip with your significant other. In these instances of casual or adventure photography, when I don't necessarily know ahead of time what I'm going to be shooting, there are three lenses that I'm going to choose between. The first and probably most obvious pick is the 18 to 55, again, which gives me that flexibility I need, and also is quite small and unobtrusive for a zoom lens. The second is probably a less obvious pick, but it's one that I love. It's the most recent addition to my collection, and that is the 80mm f2.8 macro. Why do I have this lens for travel and adventure photography, you ask? Well, for one, it provides that extra reach for those occasional times where I feel like it's worth it to switch lenses out to get something a little further away. But most important, when the light is harsh or when I know there might not be the perfect conditions for your typical landscape photography, I love looking at the small details and things you wouldn't normally see or think to look at. It gets me seeing the world differently and keeps photography exciting and interesting, and I just love this lens for what it opens up there. The third lens that I love for the same reason is, again, the 16mm 1.4. I also love this lens for its close focus capability. While it's not exactly macro, I just love how close I can get while providing really great, really wide field of view. It gives you some really interesting shots, details of knickknacks and other things you find in your adventuring, but also, again, allows you to get those wide, sweeping shots as well. Okay, so now we get into my money makers. These are the lenses that help me pay for all the other lenses. For our professional photography work, interestingly, I use two lenses that I don't normally use in any other situation, and that's the 56mm 1.2 and the 23mm 1.4. These two lenses provide the classic portrait photography focal lengths. With that 56-1.2, we're going to get the headshots, the portraits, the couples work, and if we have enough room behind us, to back up our family shots. And with the 23-1.4, we get the family shots that have environment in it or environmental portrait shots. If you're looking at starting a portrait photography business, you really only need these two lenses. Or if you're on a budget, you could even go with the 50 f2 or the 23 f2 and be just fine. For other professional work, I feel like the 50 to 140 is pretty important. If you're in a studio setting, primes are less practical and you don't need those really wide apertures anyway because you're using strobes. And then for outdoor portraits, sometimes it's nice to zoom all the way to that 140 and take advantage of that background compression it can provide. But before we leave portrait photography, I actually am also guilty of sticking in a lens that most people would not consider as a good portrait photography lens, and that is, yes, you guessed it, the 16mm 1.4. This is more of a specialty lens for me in a family shoot. Toward the end of the family photo shoot session, I like to bring out this guy and have the family gather together. Usually by then they're more comfortable with me and hopefully relaxed. I just have them just joke around and laugh and sit together, and I'm there right in the middle of them, and I capture one of my favorite family photos to get. This photo gives the viewers that feeling of being part of a candid moment, and I just love this lens for its ability to capture that moment. Is this the photo that they're going to print on their wall? No, probably not. I wish it was, but no. They're going to print that classic staring at the camera photo, at least for the people that I work with. But it almost always ends up being the photo that I like most from the shoot. For wedding photography, you occasionally see these wedding photographers roll up with their think tank bags full of lenses and other gear, and I just have to scratch my head and think, really? You really need all that gear and all those lenses? To me, it's a lot of unnecessary redundancy and just more things to keep track of, to fuss about with, or to worry about misplacing. The kit I use in a wedding is actually the same kit that I use in portrait photography. If we did shoot more weddings, I'm sure we'd invest in the 16-55 2.8, but we don't shoot enough of them to make that worth it. So I just stick again with the 23mm 1.4 for group shots, the 16mm 1.2 for portraits and low light moments, and then the 50-140 for more flexible portrait shots, all outside wedding work, as well as candid moments with flash photography. But wait, there's more, because while I would probably never use the 16-140 to photograph people at the wedding, it is absolutely magical for what it can do in the details. Again, I love how close it can get to the subjects, how much of the wedding paraphernalia it can capture, and the way it captures them. Finally, for video, there is of course the 50-140 with its OIS, its great reach and excellent quality. For everything else, again, the 18-55 variable aperture. This lens is quite adequate for video. The only thing that would make it better is probably a fixed 2.8 aperture and maybe better manual focus experience. Again, I know we've got the 16-55 2.8, but darn it all, it doesn't have OIS. As a bonus, you have, you guessed it, the B-roll king of all B-roll king lenses of the Fuji lineup, at least in my opinion. The 16mm 1.4 gives luscious bokeh, interesting close focus. It has that great feeling of that clutch manual focus that works surprisingly well for video. But the only problem is that this lens is just so loud focusing. So yes, it's become my B-roll lens of choice because I don't need audio with B-roll, but as much as I wish that I could use it for vlogging, that focus motor just makes the audio completely impractical. So I want to ask the question that probably a lot of newer Fuji photographers are asking, and that is, what if you could only take 2 or 3 lenses? Of course, that's like asking me which of my kids I would choose to keep, but if I had to, gun to my head, there's no question of what my first pick would be, and that is the 56mm 1.2, and that's because of all the lenses, it's the one that it's made me the most money. So it's the most practical lens. It's just spectacular at portraits, and that's what I do, so that's the lens that I would have to get. Second would be the 16mm 1.4 because, again, it's my favorite. If you look back in the photos I shot last year, I'd say that 50% of my personal favorites were taken with this lens, but that's just me. I know I'm a little weird. I know many other established photographers aren't going to love the 24mm focal length, equivalent focal length, as much as I do. Which brings me to the third lens, which is the gap in between, the gap filler between these extremes, and that's the 18-55. I had no idea I would love this lens as much as I do. After all, it's a kit lens and it has a variable aperture, but I can't argue with the numbers. As I look back in my work over the last 6 months, I'd say that 25% of my favorites or so were taken with this guy. So those are the 3 lenses that I would choose. So that's my Fuji lens collection. Is this my final Fuji lens collection? Yeah, I mean, it could be. It probably should be, but I know me and I can't stop. I have a problem. But I am very happy with it, and I really love all of this gear and use all of it. Are there other lens combinations? Of course there is. There are millions of possibilities and plenty of other lenses that I don't use that could work very well for your situation. Please also consider that style has a lot to do with it. You're going to prefer some focal lengths over others the more you shoot. You could probably see my own personal biases coming out very strongly. I'm sure those will change in the future though. The key is to have intent with the type of photography you do and see where you can get the most focal length overlap in those various genres. Start with the photography that is most important to you. Select the lens or lenses you need to do that type of photography with, and then only add lenses to other categories if those first lenses just absolutely don't capture those other categories for you. If you can help purchasing lenses that will only help you in one category, but you can have more overlap in others, that will help so that you don't needlessly burden yourself with lenses and expenses that you just don't need. Well guys, that's it. I really hope you found something here that was beneficial to your photographic endeavors. I wish you all the best there. And until next time, remember, kindness before cameras. We'll talk to you again real soon.